As soon as I get audio signal on my end, then we will begin. So for anybody who may be listening so far, just let me know in the chat if you can hear what I'm saying. Because so far I am getting no feedback. It usually takes a minute. Okay, I'm getting video feedback. Sweet. And I've got audio feedback. Skinny Bruce Lee is in the chat. Hello, my friend, and welcome to this live stream. Aaron is in the chat. Max says loud and clear. Excellent. Excellent. So, I'm not going to need those. It looks like the audio is coming through. The video is coming through. Everything seems to be coming through. So welcome to this live stream. It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Let's discuss something. So earlier today, Chael Sonnen put out a video that got me thinking. It was a reaction to a recent fight between Song Yaodong and Henry Cejudo, I believe it was. And Henry got poked in the eye to the point where he was no longer able to see. And the fight ended perhaps a bit prematurely. And yeah, nobody's happy about a fight ending via eye poke. Except the self-defense nerds who feel really validated. Because they say, we train with eye pokes and groin strikes and biting and scratching and throwing tantrums. In their own little neighborhood of make-believe, I'm sure they believe that. I'm sure they genuinely believe that. So, Chael Sonnen proposed this idea that boxing gloves would solve this problem, and he's not wrong, it would solve the problem, but it would create a whole unique set of problems. So if we were to contrast and to compare an MMA glove and a boxing glove, or no gloves, I've been a big advocate of just take the gloves out of MMA altogether. But people will, of course, push back on that because we have been conditioned societally to accept boxing traditions as safe and good. And a hallmark of something that lifts a combat sport from being some nitty, gritty, fringy blood sport that should be banned to something you can watch at home. Something that you wouldn't be embarrassed to see in front of your grandma because of boxing traditions like gloves and rounds and very specific rules, etc. When we didn't use the gloves in MMA, it was, of course, marketed with this story of this is basically all those illegal death fights that we saw in the movies, like Bloodsport, Shoot Fighter, King of the Kickboxers, all those great 80s and 90s movies about secret underground karate tournaments, but it's real. And that riled people up. Hot single plague doctor in your area says unless they start punishing eye pokes after a single warning, there will be little change. It's a rule set problem, not a glove problem. I believe you are correct, hot single plague doctor in your area. Anytime we change even a single rule, it changes it into a different sport. Imagine for a minute a wrestling match or a jiu-jitsu tournament that allowed an eye poke with the caveat that the punishment was a verbal warning for the referee if you looked like you were really sorry about it. and it plausibly looked accidental. And other than that, there was no DQ, no deduction of points, just a verbal warning. Hey, watch the eye pokes. Don't do that again. Yes, sir. Very sorry. Won't happen again. We would see a lot of eye poking in jiu-jitsu and wrestling matches. Imagine for a minute a grappling match, wrestling, or jiu-jitsu, where the punishment for punching your opponent in the face was a verbal warning. Think about that. What happens? No deduction of points, no disqualification, but a verbal warning. We would see punches in the face in every single match. And that punch in the face, that accidental punch in the face, would be the deciding factor in who wins and who loses. Mixed martial arts, like all other sports, is prone to what is called a professional foul. And a professional foul is milking the rules, more specifically, milking the fouls. A foul can yield a certain reward for one party involved. For example, if you were getting very tired in an MMA fight, and you really could use a 5-minute break, and you wouldn't mind if your opponent was a little bit crippled and couldn't fight as well after that 5-minute break. What is the punishment for an eye poke or a groin kick if it is accidental or looks accidental, plausibly? You get a verbal warning from the referee. He'll wag his finger at you. And then you get that 5-minute break, and then your opponent doesn't fight so good after that 5-minute break. So if there is a meaningful amount of money on the line, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to not be involved in professional fouls. And you might think, oh, but that's evil and wrong and bad. Sure, yes, of course it is. And from a certain point of view, from those willing to engage in professional fouling, it's perfectly just and fair. Why? Because the rules are being enforced. I kicked him in the groin, and I got the verbal warning from the referee. And there was the 5-minute break. The rules were enforced to the letter. Justice has been served, theoretically, even though something underhanded has taken place. So, hot single plague doctor in your area, our commentator there is quite correct. Unless they start punishing eye pokes after a single warning, there will be little change. It's a rule set problem, not a glove problem. He additionally says if you want to change the gloves, bring back the Pride gloves. So let's talk about the Pride gloves for a minute and see how much they matter. So this is not a Pride glove, but it is similar. It's a sparring glove. Okay, the type of sparring glove many manufacturers make. This one is from Combat Athletics. It's a pretty nice glove. I've used these for a lot of sparring sessions. And when I don't want to get poked in the eye, I will loan a pair of these to my training partners. And I'll show you why I'm putting it on. Specifically because it curves the fingers down. So in a resting position, unless you are flexing your fingers outward using a lot of hand strength, the resting position of the fingers is generally away from the eyes. Now, you could still deliberately dig your fingers in there, but it's much less likely to happen accidentally. So this is a pretty good glove. You can do all of the major grips, the S grip, the gable grip, the butterfly grip, the ball and socket grip, all of these basic grappling grips unimpeded. And yeah, it's got a nice amount of padding over the actual knuckles, whereas we contrast that with a standard competition MMA glove, most of the padding is over the back of the hand, which is a very strange place to put all that extra padding. It facilitates back fists and not much else. So, whoever designed the basic competition MMA glove didn't put a whole lot of research and development into this, and that's understandable because essentially they only had the edict of add gloves to the sport so that the New Jersey State Athletic Commission will sanction it. And basically overnight they came up with a design something like this, which was basically based on those old Harbinger bag gloves, but they removed the grip bar at the bottom and made it mostly open hand except this strap here. Hence they had to add that rule, no inserting your fingers into the straps of the gloves, which is often misinterpreted by Aikido dorks who think it means no grabbing the hand, and they say, if it wasn't for that rule, I could wrist lock everybody in the UFC. No, you couldn't, because one, you don't know how to fight, and two, that's not the actual rule. It means no inserting fingers into the straps of the gloves, no sticking your fingers in the straps of the other guy's gloves, or this part here, or digging your finger in right here into that strap, or digging your finger into the fingers. See, that's the rule. It doesn't mean no holding on to the hand which is within the glove. So a better glove design would solve a lot of problems. But let's talk about boxing gloves for a minute. Chael Sonnen proposed an idea, and I want to discuss it for a bit, which was that just wearing boxing gloves, no special glove like the Pride glove, but boxing gloves in particular would solve all the eye poke problems, and it would, but I would posit it would present a lot of other problems. Now, Chael said the opposite. He said, no, nobody has ever done a sparring session with boxing gloves, and then afterward said, if it wasn't for those dang gloves, then that would have been totally different. I've said that. Now, I sometimes wear boxing gloves for MMA sparring, primarily for focusing on the stand-up element, and then once you go to the ground, generally I'll stand up, kind of like Sanda rules for sparring, but sometimes I have on occasion done full sparring sessions with the big gloves on, even big 16-ounce gloves like this. But it does present a few unique problems, two in particular. One, it does change the viability of the grips. For example, getting an S-grip, it's possible, it's just a whole lot harder with boxing gloves on, and the S-grip is one of the most important grips in the sport of mixed martial arts, more so than in straight submission grappling. You can get a butterfly grip, although it is a bit wonky and tends to slip out quite a bit. So essentially with the boxing gloves on, you can't really rely on the grips as much. Now, it is a great exercise for all MMA fighters to do, to practice grappling with the boxing gloves on so that you can learn to become less reliant on very specific hand grips and more reliant on using your wrists to grab and control your opponent and use your body and your body position to grab and control your opponent. Valley Gomo says, "Hi, Coach. I missed the beginning. Are we speaking about Jesus yet?" Not yet, but we might get there. We might somehow transfer this conversation from boxing gloves and MMA to Jesus at some point. Just give it time. Give it enough time. It'll happen, I'm sure. But anyway, if you've never competed in Sanda, it's a really fun sport. Quick rundown of the rules. It's essentially a Chinese hybrid kickboxing sport where you can punch, kick, and do throws and takedowns as long as you remain on your feet as you throw your opponent to the mat or off of the platform. So, throws and takedowns, if you've never done it wearing boxing gloves before, it's going to feel extremely difficult. And if you have practiced a meaningful amount of time doing throws and takedowns with the boxing gloves on, there is a whole syllabus of throws and takedowns where you can wear the boxing gloves, and those particular takedowns are a lot easier, and those are generally the ones we will see in Sanda. okay? As opposed to any takedown that might require a particularly special grip, such as a Russian tie-up and then tie it into one of these knots that requires a C-grip, because you can't do a C-grip with a boxing glove on, and then your fist right here, and then duck your head under and roll. It's a really cool throw. I've taught you how to do this on my channel, but it requires that very particular grip. The second big problem with boxing gloves is the volume. It's the size. And since the whole point of MMA is to be as close to a neutral arena as possible, if we add something that essentially doubles or triples or quadruples the size of the hand and the wrist, that presents a bunch of problems, especially with grappling. The more equipment you wear, the less viable grappling becomes. And this is one of the reasons it surprised me that Chael, a wrestler by trade, was advocating so hard for the boxing gloves. The Fresh Prince of Bell Ends asks, does combat sambo have an eye poke problem? You know what? I don't know. I haven't seen enough combat sambo to see how many and how often eye pokes occur. Now, some people are bringing up the idea of the Judo helmet. Now, of course, the Judo helmet has a face mask over it, so it is impossible to get poked in the eye. It's also impossible for a number of other valid things that could happen in a fight to happen if your face is entirely covered. And increasing the size of your head presents a whole unique set of problems. Going back to making the hands bigger, for example, this makes grappling a lot harder. Let's say you have somebody in side control, and you want to swim your hand under the head so that you can get head and arm control, but you have a 16-ounce glove or a 12-ounce glove or even a 10 or 8-ounce glove on your hand, a boxing glove. You got this big old knot you now have to weave under there, and it becomes significantly more difficult to the point that that technique now is no longer viable. Let's say you're in side control and you want to attack with an Americana, even though it is one of the lowest percentage submission attacks in mixed martial arts. Even so, it's now going to be significantly more difficult to weave your hands around that arm, and it's going to become much more difficult. However, I just recently saw a fight with Butterbean and some other dude his size. Butterbean is this giant man who is like equal parts muscle and fat and just huge, and he won an MMA fight with the Americana. And with those giant ham hocks he has for hands, that was fairly analogous to doing so with a boxing glove on. Okay, we have a couple of super chats here. Brave Lil Spidey says, is this Ramsey or his older brother? How was your trip? Tell us about it when you get the chance. Okay, this is Ramsey. I recently did a video with my older brother who lives in Thailand. He lives in Bangkok. Went and visited him, and people often joke when my brother appears on my channel that they can't tell the difference between us. We're both bald dudes. I'll tell you the secret to discerning between which one is Ramsey, which one is Ramsey's brother. Ramsey has brown eyes. Ramsey's brother has blue eyes. That's the only way you will be able to tell the difference. Otherwise, we are virtually identical in every way. Let's see, I think we missed one other super chat up here, and it is from Aaron Gobidas, who just sent in some cash, and no question. So, hey, thank you, Aaron. That is very generous of you. I appreciate your patronage. So, Bulag Bandit Media asks, does one championship Muay Thai or Kardchuk Muay Thai have eye poke problems too? Kardchuk, however you pronounce that in Thai. I don't know, my brother could tell you, he speaks Thai. That's where the hands are wrapped up with ropes, with these small, thin ropes. He has not noticed a eye poke problem, even though the fingers are unrestricted. Yeah, I've seen probably a dozen of those fights. And I don't even know if they stop a fight for an eye poke in Muay Thai. I know that they definitely don't with the gloves on. Like if you jam the point of your elbow into somebody's eye, that's fair game in Muay Thai. But as far as the open fingers, I know 1FC does Muay Thai fights with MMA gloves on, with the little gloves on. And yeah, we haven't really seen a representative example of guys getting eye poked under that particular rule set. So, let me ask you this question. Have you ever done MMA sparring with boxing gloves on? And if so, how did you feel that that affected your performance, if at all? Did you feel that sparring with boxing gloves on for MMA sparring made it worse, better, about the same? Do you feel like it restricted your ability to grapple or otherwise maneuver in certain positions? If so, what? Now, here's an interesting fact about the history of boxing gloves. If you look close at a boxing glove, it now has the thumb attached right there with a piece of webbing to the mitt of the glove. And a few decades back, this wasn't the case. If you get an old pair of boxing gloves, the thumb is free. And the reason they started stitching the thumb to the mitt is specifically because boxers were instigating professional fouls and digging the thumb into the eyes of their opponents. They were eye gouging each other. There was, in fact, an eye gouging problem in boxing. Sometimes it would happen up in the clinch and they'd press the thumb in there. Sometimes it would happen while throwing a punch with an extended thumb directed directly at the eye. It became such a problem that boxing commissioners mandated the boxing gloves themselves had to be changed and the thumb had to be stitched to the mitt. So in the case of professional boxing, changing the gloves solved the problem. Okay, we have a little bit of feedback about my question in the comments section here. So brave little Spidey did an MMA sparring with boxing gloves a few times. He says it's more difficult to hold and do chokes. It makes me focus more on striking. Yeah, I would say so. I did an MMA fight. I think it was like my second or third MMA fight in China. And they gave us boxing gloves instead of MMA gloves. And the guy I was fighting was predominantly a striker, and my grappling was significantly better than his, but I felt very nerfed. And about the only grappling technique I could set up effectively with the boxing gloves on was the triangle choke. So I remember catching with the triangle choke. He taps out. The referee stood us back up and started the fight over again. I caught him in another triangle choke. The referee stands us back up. Every time I catch the student in a triangle choke, they would stand us back up because the referee decided tapping out was insignificant, and he basically wanted to see a kickboxing match, but call it an MMA fight. So after tapping this guy out 5 times with 5 different triangle chokes in this boxing glove match, the referee tried to stand us up again, but my opponent could not stand up. So that fight sucked. I won, but I had about that much fun doing it. It was aggravating, and especially since the rules were not really well discussed with the fighters beforehand, that's a major problem. If you're going to fight with boxing gloves, if you're going to fight with special stand-up, no submission rules or whatever, you need to make sure the fighters understand these things before the fight, not during or after. Tapping out with boxing gloves is weird, says Valigomu. Yeah, that's a good point. Wearing a large glove does make it more difficult to see a tap unless you tap really, really big. Okay, guys. Have we beat this subject to death so far? I'm trying to think of all of the MMA fights I've seen with boxing gloves on, and I've seen quite a few because it was fairly common to see MMA fights with boxing gloves on in the early days of MMA in China, before MMA gloves became widely manufactured here. And so a lot of the early MMA fights I saw were MMA fights in boxing gloves. And they were often glorified Sanda matches involving Sanda fighters, and they would sometimes play around on the ground a little bit, but mostly it was stand-up kickboxing, an occasional takedown here or there. But they would call it MMA. Yeah. Okay, Luke 10 says maybe the better option would be to make the rule set penalize eye poking with more severe consequences like disqualification or a more serious point deduction. Okay, I think you're onto something here, but let's follow this through to its logical conclusion. See how this plays out. So, eye poking can happen accidentally. I've even accidentally poked people in the eye during sparring sessions. It's not the norm, it's not what I usually do, but in hundreds and thousands of hours of sparring and training, it happens. It happens sometimes in spite of your best intentions. I've been poked in the eye many, many times in sparring sessions by people who did not intend to do so. It simply happens sometimes when fingers are free. So, my question to our friend Luke would be, how are we going to penalize this? Is it a penalty regardless of intent, whether it is accidental or not? Are we going to get, say, as strict as the IBJJF with knee reaping, as far as they used to be anyway? If it looks like knee reaping, if your leg goes 1 centimeter over the center line of the thigh, knee reaping, instant disqualification, even if you're really sorry and it was an accident. Okay, is that how serious we're going to be? Okay, let's assume we are. And if an accidental eye poke happens, the perpetrator is now disqualified. Okay, this sounds pretty round and fair until we follow it through to the logical conclusion, which is how do we exploit that? And I would say the same way that the knee reaping rule got milked in IBJJF with the false reaps, where a standing competitor, for example, would take the foot of the downed competitor who was attempting a leg entanglement, and then he would push their foot over the center line, look up at the referee, knee reaping, and the referee, well, I guess we have to disqualify them because that's what the rule says. So, apply this to eye pokes in MMA. If we are instantly disqualifying anybody who is the perpetrator of an eye poke, what happens if we're in a very close clinch and maybe I grab that guy's hand and push my eye into it? I got eye poked. Ref, look, it happened. It happened. It's on camera. We can see the slow motion replay. I was grabbing his hand trying to force it away from my eye, not to eye gouge myself. Why would anybody do that? Why? Because they want to win a fight. They want to win a championship. They want to win money and fame and all that good stuff. Why would anybody do that? People milk professional fouls constantly in every sport that involves professional fouls. And when we put the onus of responsibility on the other guy to protect you instead of on the fighter to protect themselves at all times, when we ignore rule number 1 of all fighting, we turn combat sports into something goofy, into something stupid, into something in which we can absolutely milk the rules in a way that goes to the other extreme. Think for a minute about ONE FC rules compared to UFC rules regarding the rule of spiking. No spiking your opponent onto their head. Okay, in UFC rules, this is how that is interpreted. No pile drivers. You may not invert your opponent into that upside down position where their head is facing the mat and then drop or spike or slam them directly onto their head. As far as ONE FC interprets this rule, if, while doing a takedown, any takedown at all, if your opponent lands on their head, regardless of your intent, it is the result, not the intention, not the instigation of the takedown, but the result of your opponent falling on their head that will result in your disqualification. And this rule has been enforced. And it's made ONE FC goofy when it comes to takedowns. Really goofy. The onus of responsibility to protect yourself in ONE FC is now on your opponent, not you. It is a very stupid choice. So, if there is a deliberate foul, a flagrant foul, there's already a rule there. There are already rules to punish that, and to punish it extremely. I've reffed a lot of fights over the years, and I've been a professional fighter, and I've been on the receiving end of fouls. And it is extremely easy to make a foul look like an accident. Groin kicks, for example. It looks like a leg kick. It looks like an inside leg kick. A very common technique. Whoops. He wasn't in the right place. He moved. Because he's trying to intelligently defend himself, so he moved. And my leg, instead of hitting the inside of his leg, hit a little bit higher. Whoops. I'm so sorry. What's the referee supposed to do? It's an accident, and so he has to enforce the rule. 5-minute break, verbal warning. Have you ever seen a low blow in an MMA fight where it looked deliberate? Have you? Where it just looked like a flagrant foul. Like maybe that dude is on the ground in an open guard, there's a standing fighter, he grabs the ankles, opens up the legs, and stomps right in the groin. I've never seen that in an MMA fight. Now maybe some of you are thinking about Keith Hackney back in the early days where groin shots were not fouls, and he punched Joe Son repeatedly in the groin. Yeah, brave little Spidey immediately brings up that fight. But as far as sanctioned MMA, with that rule of no low blows, how many have you seen where you just knew that is a flagrant foul, that was on purpose? Yeah, a competent leg kicker is going to make something that is deliberate look like an accident very, very easily. Even John Jones, who in interviews has openly said, I deliberately poke people in the eyes because the consequence is a 5-minute break and a verbal warning. And he was very good at milking that rule, making it look like an accident. I'm just keeping my hand out there. I'm just using a long guard. Oh, we got poked in the eye. That's too bad. John Jones has been open about that. And even then, the referee has to give him the benefit of the doubt. He just has to. So Luke, or Lose K10, says, man, that's a tough dilemma. I think at that point, it would depend heavily upon the discretion of a very knowledgeable and experienced referee that recognizes a fighter that is exploiting the rules. Ideally, yeah, but at the same time, let's go back to that John Jones case. We know John Jones has openly admitted to purposefully poking people in the eye. Referees recognize him. They recognize this as a pattern. And is the suggestion that the referee, if John Jones pokes a guy in the eye, because he has a history of doing it, and doing it on purpose, we know he's done it on purpose, is it now that the referee should have a responsibility to penalize John Jones specifically? What if John Jones' opponent pokes him in the eye and says, oh, whoops, it was an accident. I'm very sorry. But not penalize John Jones' opponent who pokes him in the eye because he doesn't have that history? Should we just keep tabs on how many eye pokes and accidental groin kicks each fighter has, and there's a certain allotment? Oh, you reach the threshold, 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is. So now, from now on, there are no warnings. So it's now cumulative warnings throughout your fight career. We run into some goofy problems there. Valley Gomo says, the problem is that John Jones is above the law in the sport of MMA. I understand why you would say that. He's a very famous fighter. He's a big draw. Sells a lot of pay-per-views. And so it may be in the promoter's interest to let certain things slide. However, I would say a fighter acting exactly the same way as John Jones, but without the notoriety and the fame, would experience the same exact consequences. Meaning he would get those eye pokes, say, whoops, it was an accident, I'm very sorry, and then he would get the verbal warning and the 5-minute break. SBV brings up the elephant in the room when he says maybe fighters should defend significantly more intelligently than they do now. Aha! Slow clap for that one. Ooh. How about that? How about that? Protect yourself at all times instead of relying on equipment or a referee or a rule set to protect you. There was a fight a few years back where the guy starts butt scooting out toward his opponent. He is exploiting the rule that you may not kick the head of a downed fighter. And so he butt scoots right within kicking range, and his opponent kicks him in the head and knocks him out. The fighter who landed the kick to the downed opponent is disqualified, and the downed fighter who just got knocked out is now declared the winner. However, this gentleman got severely injured. Is it worth it? Now, most people commenting on this fight said, no, not worth it. He did a really dumb thing. He played a stupid game and he won a stupid prize. Yeah, he won the fight, but at what cost? A skull fracture? A concussion? Maybe something worse, maybe some broken teeth. I mean, he took a full contact shin across the face undefended. Man, that can set you up with a lot of problems. But he tried to milk the rule set, and he reaped some bitter rewards. Now, this was not a high-profile fight, wasn't in the UFC. He was probably fighting for a couple $100 max. His medical bills probably cost him more than what he had won during that match. Average Xiaohongshu enjoyer says, how about the eye poker must wear an eye patch for 1 minute? That's funny. You poked the eye, now you must wear the eye patch of shame. No! Let's... Oh, man. Instead of a verbal warning, if the perpetrator had to wear like some mark of shame, a cone of shame around their head like a dog who just had surgery or something. I don't know, man. Had to like tie a hand behind their back. Something goofy. That would make it a way different sport. But I really like what our friend SBV brought up here, which is how about we start intelligently defending ourselves better? Okay? And instead of simply relying on people not to eye poke us because the rules say don't eye poke the other guy, protect your eyes more intelligently. I'll tell you a story. I had this student, this fairly new student who was just really raw, and he didn't speak English at all, and I had a hard time communicating with him. He didn't speak Chinese either. And he liked to grab people's fingers and twist them and bend them. And I remember I'm grappling with him, and he's not a very experienced grappler. I start strangling him. He grabs one of my fingers and starts legitimately trying to break it. And I ripped my hand out of there and strangled him, got him to tap out. And then afterwards I was like, dang, that guy really hurt my finger. My finger hurt for like 2 months after that. And I tried to explain to him, hey man, don't break your training partner's fingers, save that for the streets or whatever. But every time I would roll with this guy from that point forward, I would make it a point, don't let him touch my fingers. Which was a pretty easy thing to do because my grappling skill level was much, much better than his. But if we simply rely on the good nature of the guy trying to knock you the F out to protect you, you're placing your trust in the wrong source. So, remember rule number 1 of all fighting, my friends. Protect yourself at all times. Even in the gym, even in sparring sessions with guys you trust, protect your fingers, protect your eyes, protect your groin. Don't just stick yourself out there on a silver platter for the taking just because the rules say, don't do that. Because the rules don't pay your medical bills. Also, if you want your martial art to be more applicable to self-defense, spend some time ruling with all the white belts in jiu-jitsu class, because they will do the crazy stuff like grab your fingers and try to break them, try to claw your eyes out on purpose or otherwise, bite you, headbutt you, kick you in the teeth, and all kinds of other things that you shouldn't be doing in a casual role in a jiu-jitsu class, but they will do it. They will do it. They just can't help themselves. They're wild, untamed animals. And we abide by rules because we have tamed ourselves. But the noobs, nope, they're not tamed. They're wild. They're like wild kittens. They're these feral cats that live outside my apartment, and I give them some cat food every day, pat them on the head. They're nice little cute animals, but there are a couple of them that are kittens. They're a few months old, and unlike the older cats who are used to me and they're pretty tame around me, these kittens like to stick their claws out and stick their teeth out and examine the world with their claws and their teeth. And they're not being, they're just kittens. It's how kittens are. It's how kittens play. Now, they're not trying to murder me. They're trying to play with me. But when kittens play, whether it's with other kittens or a human that they consider cat-like enough to play with, they'll still sink the teeth in and sink the claws in to a certain degree. And wild white belts that attack you in the gym are exactly the same way. They're like kittens. They're fairly harmless, but if you're not watching yourself, they'll still scratch and bite you. All right, guys, I think I've talked this. Oh, the sound is cutting out. What's happening? Oh, no. Oh, no, the sound is cutting out. What is going on? Oh, hold on. I think I see what's happening. Let's make some adjustments with the microphone. Do we have sound? Is the sound coming back in? I hope so. Let's open this chat up to some questions. We'll open up to questions and super chats and all that stuff. And if you guys still want to talk about eye pokes and boxing gloves and all that, we can do that. But from this point forward, let's start a regular edition of Q&A with the coach. So, hey, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to this edition of Q&A with the coach. Just leave your questions in the comments section, and I will answer as many of them as I can in the next 20 minutes or so before I hang it up. Do I think someone from a third world country can become a UFC champion? Yes, and I believe that's actually happened before. So, yeah. Anybody with the right physical gifts can become a UFC champion. So we've seen UFC champs from first world countries, second world countries, and even third world countries. It can happen. Of course it can happen. Third world, second world, and first world. This is a socio-political division, really. First world generally refers to countries that are allied with the United States. Second world referring to communist countries or former communist countries. And third world referring to everybody else. Sweet, Martial Geeks is in the chat. You're just in time for the Q&A section. So far we have had one question for this Q&A, which is, do I think somebody from a third world country can become a UFC champion? Let's discuss perhaps some of the more unique issues somebody from a third world country might have. And I think the main issue is availability of training. But even in the third world, you have the internet. Skinny Bruce Lee sends in a super chat and says, Greco or freestyle? Want to get back into wrestling? Well, which wrestling style do you prefer? I personally prefer freestyle. But Greco-Roman wrestling presents a bunch of unique challenges. And some people like that, so I would say, dude, whichever one is available and preferable to you, do that one. Hothead Geo says, who do I think has a bigger beef? Billy Robinson with BJJ or George Silver with Italian sword fighting? Yeah, George Silver was specifically upset with the rapier, the Italian rapier. He didn't like it. He thought it was dumb. And he commented on single rapier combat, essentially saying, every rapier fight with anybody who is halfway decent at sword fighting turns into a grappling match rather than a sword fight. And if neither man is a good sword fighter, then the stronger man is the one who's going to end up killing his opponent if they're fighting with rapiers. So he was not a big fan of those. As far as Billy Robinson, famous catch wrestling coach. You know, I've never heard Billy Robinson beefing with BJJ, even though I know there is traditionally a rift between catch wrestlers and jiu-jitsu artists. I think Billy Robinson was just more interested in coaching catch wrestling. Not so much showing catch wrestling is better than BJJ or some nonsense like that, but every time I heard the man speak, it was just always, this is how to wrestle. This is how to do this move. Here's how to do it better. Now do it again. One of the greatest coaching cues ever from Billy Robinson right there. Do it again. Do it again. Coach, how do I do it again? Oh. Shaolin Martial Arts. You sent me an email, didn't you? Something about you are in Shanghai and you want to train and you want to come the day after tomorrow. That's perfect, because the day after tomorrow I will be teaching an MMA class over at the Extreme Fight Lab, so you're welcome to join. So, you know what? I will check your email here and send you the, what do we call it? Send you the gym address, since you're having difficulty finding it online. So let me remind myself after this stream to send you the gym address. So that class should start at 7:30 on Thursday, Shanghai time. So come join us. We'll get out there and train. It'll be awesome. Skinny Bruce Lee wants to know why catch wrestling isn't more popular compared to BJJ, because BJJ had a better marketing campaign, better storytelling, and they have uniforms. Let's talk about uniforms for a minute. Martial arts uniforms, as inconsequential as it may seem, that makes a big deal in student retention. If you want student retention, if you want your cult to be popular, have matching white robes. Yeah, I'm not even kidding about that. It sounds like a joke, but it's true. If you want a popular cult, have matching uniforms. SBV says, I don't like uniforms. Yeah, sure. You specifically, individually, don't like uniforms. However, statistically speaking, martial arts gyms with uniforms are going to outperform the schools without uniforms, as far as finances go, as far as sales go, and as far as student retention goes. Something about investing something extra, having a physical reminder in your home, this is my uniform, something about being physically similar to everybody else by wearing the same uniform as everybody else. And it's not just wearing a gi, but a matching gi. Like jiu-jitsu gyms where everybody wears a matching gi, the same color with the same patch, the same design, etc. These are much more commercially viable than gyms where you can wear any gi, any brand, any style, whatever you want. Yeah, I know we don't like that that's true, but that's true. Sweet, we have a super chat from Martial Geeks who says, what was the hardest fight you've ever had? Any combat sport rule set. Interestingly, the toughest one for me was my first when losses were easier? It's a good question. I fought some tough dudes who beat me pretty quickly, and it's not that experience was particularly tough. Like I remember fighting what's his name, Leandro Issa. He was a third degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt at the time. I think he's like a fifth degree now. He was a world champion in Jiu-Jitsu, a very experienced MMA fighter, won every one of his fights via submission, and in about a minute, he tapped me out, and that's basically exactly what everybody, including myself, expected to happen in this fight. And was it a hard fight? I mean, he got a pretty easy takedown, got side control, locked up a Kimura, and there wasn't it wasn't hard in the fact that anything that happened in the fight was difficult, because it's pretty easy to fall onto your back and then tap out. That's physically easy. The hard part about this fight was cutting the weight, because I was tricked into doing what I thought would be a catch weight match where I would have to cut a few pounds, and then I show up and I ended up having to cut multiple weight classes. So that weight cut nearly killed me. That weight cut was the real fight. That was the difficult part, was shedding multiple weight classes of water weight in less than 24 hours and doing it without a sauna or without any specialized equipment to cut that weight. But as far as actual fights that were difficult, let me think. Now, I did mention that MMA fight I did with the boxing gloves, where I had to triangle choke this dude 5 times before he finally quit, and the ref kept standing us up over and over again every time the other dude would tap out. That one was physically exhausting. That was probably the most physically exhausting fight. It's probably the fight where I ended up doing the most work. And it ended up being a 5-round fight. I remember after the third round, because it was scheduled to be a 3-round fight. After the third round, the referee started a 4th round. I was like, what the heck? We were both very tired. It was a 4th round, and then after the 4th round, the referee said, round 5. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is not supposed to be a championship fight. It's supposed to be like just a regular 3-round fight. I didn't get a title belt for that. Any fight where you can't really prepare for the contingencies you're going to face is going to be tough in some unique ways. So I would say, just as far as the most physically demanding one, that one. Nur4 says weight cutting by dehydration should be illegal. I agree, but my reasons are probably very different from yours. You probably think that it should be illegal because it gives people an unfair advantage. I think it should be illegal because it's stupid and can and has led to the death of fighters, and it is terrible for your health, and fighters should not be encouraged to do something like that, which is insane. Forget about any advantage you may get from weight cutting. Aha! Deep Blue Biologist asks a question that I actually made a video about 2 days ago. However, my microphone's cut out, and all of the footage ended up being scrapped. Yeah, I recorded about 3 hours of content the other day, and the microphone's cut out on every single minute of that content. All wasted. But here's the question. How do you think hand-to-hand combat in low zero gravity would work? Would they use grappling? Yes, since striking would be difficult without gravity. Which martial arts would translate good into this? Playing guard in Jiu-Jitsu would translate 100% into zero gravity, much more so than any other strategy in all martial arts, including all grappling arts. Because in zero gravity, guard is also mount. So in order to effectively fight in zero gravity, you would have to clinch. You could not rely on the floor, you could not rely on gravity, falling steps, weight transfer, etc., because there is no weight. But anything you can do in the guard, well, with the exception of sweeps, you could do in zero gravity. But as far as attacks, chokes, and joint locks, yeah, all of those would work exactly the same way in zero gravity. Now I'm curious, what would happen? What would happen if you tried striking in zero gravity? Because you wouldn't weigh anything. Your opponent wouldn't weigh anything either. Nerf War says, what if you just kind of launch yourself off the walls in zero gravity? I don't know. If you're weightless and you hit someone, does it hurt them even if you're going fast? Or would you just push yourself off of them with the punch? I don't know how that works. And I don't think the folks at the International Space Station are doing enough experiments on the real zero gravity questions that matter. How does fighting work on the International Space Station? Guys, astronauts up there, if you're listening, you're going to have to get in some fistfights to answer some questions for science. SBV says, I think every punch and kick would just bounce off. Maybe half the force would go into the opponent, half goes to bounce. I don't know. And if anybody is definitively saying, well, this is how it works in zero gravity, you're lying because you've never been in a fistfight in zero gravity. Martial Geeks wants to know, are we talking zero Gs or a free fall? And this is probably different. So, for example, if you go on the Vomit Comet, for example, it's an aircraft used to simulate zero gravity. They fly up really high and then plunge down really low for a few seconds and then resume a normal flight path. And as they're dropping, like almost a free fall, that free fall simulates zero gravity and makes everybody inside the plane start to float for the duration of the free fall. Is it the same as zero gravity? No. But are you floating as you might on the International Space Station? Yeah. Is it the same? No. So that equation is different. Alexander Lako says, thoughts on karambits? Karambits, those are those funky curved knives that look kind of like dinosaur talons. What would you even do with that? For all of you out there who collect martial arts and self-defense weapons, have any of you ever actually used one before? If any of you own a karambit, what have you done with that? Have you ever cut somebody with that? Has anybody ever attacked you on the streets and then you whipped out a karambit and you're like, wah! And start doing your best Velociraptor impersonation? I would wager that for the overwhelming majority of humans who own those things, they have never once and will never use them. Nerf Wars says, I've opened Amazon packages with a karambit. Very deadly. Real life application right there. Johnny Quid says, I have a karambit, but I never used it and would never use it. It's extremely hard to use in a real fight. Yeah, that is a very strange shape to use in a real fight, since the blade curves in, and it seems like to actually cut somebody with it, you would have to get very, very close. Much closer than you would even with like a short little pen blade. Brave Little Spidey wants to know, what happens when two asteroids or comets collide in zero gravity? Can that simulate punches and kicks in zero gravity, I would say the scale of that experiment would be way off, because asteroids and comets are much, much, much larger than human beings. So we're talking about fairly massive celestial objects as opposed to a human body. So, not quite the same scale. Hothead Geo says, what do I think of honorary black belts? You mentioned you have a honorary black belt in kyokushin karate without training directly on it. That is true. What do I think of honorary black belts? Well, you might notice I don't generally go around wearing my honorary black belt, because that's about as much as it means to me. It means that some nice people I respect handed me an honorary rank once. And it's like, okay, that's nice, but beyond that, it doesn't really mean much. How much does a regular run-of-the-mill black belt mean, or any belt rank? A belt rank means that your instructor, your coach, your teacher believes that you represent his system, that you are a fair representative of his teaching. What is an honorary black belt? It's like an honorary college degree. It's an honorific achievement and nothing else. That means somebody you have not directly trained with hands you the black belt because they think, I don't know, they think it's a nice thing to do. That's it. Now you've heard of it. I have a friend who is a Shotokan black belt, 5th degree Shotokan black belt, and he received an honorary Taekwondo black belt. He showed up to a Taekwondo gym, trained with the guys, hit it off with them. They respected his abilities, and since Shotokan technique is so similar to Taekwondo technique, and Shotokan forms and Taekwondo forms are virtually identical, except the order in which the particular moves are performed, they gave him an honorary Taekwondo black belt. This sort of thing does happen. It's a nice thing to do. I've seen people get honorary Jiu-Jitsu black belts as well. If you stop and think about it, every belt rank is honorary. I saw this Instagram post. I forget the dude's name, but he's quite old and he's quite sick. And he just received his 5th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And the post is him in a hospital bed with tubes all over him, looking like he's about to die, and he's holding the belt. And I'm thinking, I mean, that's great that he gets that belt. And it reminded me of something Shintaro Higashi said about belts, and I'm going to paraphrase this. He said this on his channel, which is the red belt or the red and white belt, all these upper senior belts in Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, they give them to you when you are old and injured and you can't do Judo anymore, to make you feel like you're still participating somehow. Alexander Lako says, do black belts ever get tapped out by white belts? Is there such a thing as someone who's just that strong and natural at wrestling or BJJ? I had a student who was enormously powerful and strong and huge and athletic and just this enormous physical specimen. And his rank, white belt, and I saw him roll with some black belts, and he, through his athleticism and rudimentary jiu-jitsu and great strength, was able to just crush them. Now, I don't think these guys were prepared for that kind of battle. I think these black belts were expecting a friendly little roll with a white belt who just happened to be a little bit bigger than the average guy, and were shocked at the immense strength difference. Anybody can tap out to anybody who has a basic understanding of jiu-jitsu if you compromise your position. Remember earlier we were talking about the student who tried to break people's fingers, and every time I would roll with this guy, I would watch my fingers. Yeah, it's like asking, can a white belt break a black belt's fingers? Yes, of course. If the black belt is not watching out for his fingers, absolutely. Mystery Man wants to know how colorblind people deal with belt colors. There's a whole spectrum of color blindness. My younger brother Mark, for example, is red-green colorblind, meaning that with certain shades of red, green, brown, and shades in between red, green, and brown, if they appear in certain patterns in certain instances, it will be impossible or difficult to tell the difference between them. So, as far as telling the difference between a blue belt, a purple belt, a brown belt, and a black belt, the white belt and the black belt, that's obviously very easy. The blue belt doesn't even fit into the red-green spectrum. The purple and brown, that might be difficult for somebody with red-green color blindness, depending on the particular shade of purple, since some shades of purple and some shades of brown would appear the same. Do any of you deal with color blindness? I had a great uncle who was colorblind, but he was also a painter, and a very good painter. And people were shocked at the quality of his painting when they heard, this man is colorblind. How do you do it? I don't know. Never had that conversation with him. All right, guys, it looks like the questions are not really showing up in the chat here. We had a fun little hypothetical discussion about zero gravity, karambits, color blindness. Okay, now we have some questions. Johnny Quid says, Coach, is saying a black belt is someone who just mastered the basics true? What is your take on this? I know there are a lot of traditional martial artists out there who will essentially water down the idea of a black belt and say, essentially, the black belt doesn't really mean anything. You can absolutely suck at martial arts and have a black belt, and that's okay. A black belt just means you understand the very basics of the thing. And it's like, dude, if it takes you 5 to 10 years to understand the very basics of your martial art, you are really, really bad at training and really, really bad at allocating your training time. I think a black belt should be meaningful. It should mean something. It should mean that you are pretty good at your martial art. And if you're not pretty good at your martial art, you probably shouldn't be wearing a black belt. I mean, that is why lower belt ranks were invented, specifically to keep retaining students, make them feel like they're accomplishing something, even though they're not particularly good at their martial art yet. So you give them some colored belts until they get good. Let's make black belts great again, my friends. Forget about politics. Let's make black belts great again. Do you remember back in the 80s where you could say, I have a black belt in karate, and people would immediately respect that because they knew that in the 1980s, a black belt in karate meant something. It meant that you were good at karate. And now, if you say, I'm a black belt in karate, that doesn't mean that you're good at karate. Forget about good at fighting, just good at karate. You don't even have to be good at doing the forms to get a black belt in karate at a lot of dojos now. It's ridiculous. Make black belts great again. Valigomu says, I am a karate black belt and everyone still thinks I'm a nerd because I am. Because you are a nerd. So am I. We all are. Alexander Lako wants to know, what is the highest BJJ belt rank that you have rolled with? Let me think. Highest BJJ belt rank. Trying to think of what degree all the various black belts I've rolled with have had. Dang, I don't even remember. I'd say probably the highest BJJ belt rank I've rolled with would be 5th degree black belt. But do you know what that means? So, degrees on a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, those are honorary timestamps. So you get the black belt after your coach decides you're good enough to get the black belt. And in 2 years, you qualify for your first stripe on the black belt. 2 more is you qualify for your second stripe. 3 years later, you qualify for your third stripe. 3 years later, another stripe. Every 3 years after that, you can qualify for another stripe. They're timestamps. It's not like you're twice as good as the other guy. You're 5 times as good as the other guy, so you got 5 stripes. Now, ideally, you should be spending that time getting better at jiu-jitsu, but yeah. Don Fry, UFC champion, once said, Jiu-Jitsu is a watered-down version of Judo. How accurate is that statement? I would say that statement is not accurate at all. Probably from Don's perspective, he felt that was accurate because why else would he have said that? It's different. Both martial arts, Judo derived from Kano Jiu-Jitsu, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu also derived from Kano Jiu-Jitsu, had the same starting point. They're radically different things now. Judo right now, I would say, is a watered-down version of Kano Jiu-Jitsu in many ways. There's a big spectrum of skill that you will find with modern Judo black belts. I have met Judo black belts, many of whom who were absolute pushovers, and Judo black belts who were the polar opposite, who were just really, really good, solid, well-rounded grapplers. I've met Judo guys who were complete fish out of water on the ground, didn't know a dang thing about ground fighting, and Judo guys who could hold their own with their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu equivalents on the ground. So Judo isn't just one thing, if we're being honest about what that is. If you've only ever trained with one Judo school, like the Judo school in your hometown, and you haven't experienced Judo outside of that, then you don't know very much about Judo. And I'm not saying like you don't know very many Judo techniques. I'm saying you don't know how broad the spectrum of Judo really is. You don't know how good it can get, and you don't know how bad it can get. I would say I've noticed a lot more consistency in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than Judo. So if I see a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, I have a better idea of what his skill level is than if I see a judo black belt. Again, that judo black belt could be a world beater. He could be a complete putz. He could be somewhere in between. I don't know. I've seen everything. I've seen jiu-jitsu black belts who weren't that great, but still, like even the worst Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that I've met and rolled with was still pretty dang good at jiu-jitsu. So again, I would say there's a lot more consistency with belt ranks and skill in jiu-jitsu right now, which is kind of odd since I think judo in many ways has a better ranking system as far as competitive ranking system goes. So a judo black belt friend of mine explained it to me, the ranking system he went through, and I'm not sure if all judo schools do this. Apparently not all judo schools do, otherwise I think we would see a lot more consistency, but they are awarded a certain number of points based on performance in tournaments, and if they receive a certain number of points, they can qualify for certain belt promotions. And that sounds, in theory, like it would produce a lot of consistent results, but I have yet to see the consistent results. Dudas Bentz says, "Hey coach, I'm training with some of my old training partners because since I started my PhD, I don't have time to go to my old gym. Any tips on how to not become a Mcdojo? None of us want to be pro." Okay, so you're training with some old training partners. You're working on a PhD. You don't have time to go to your gym. You don't want your group to become a Mcdojo. But none of you want to be a professional. Well, professional means that's what you're doing for a living. I made a video years ago titled "Be a Professional." And in that video, I'm basically saying, take your martial arts seriously. Even if you are not a professional fighter, it's not what you do for a living, take it seriously. So people often give themselves that out, that face-saving exit. Well, we're not professionals, and so we don't have to take this seriously. Our standards can be low. And here's a problem with low standards in martial arts. They get people hurt. So one of the most important reasons to be a professional, as in take it seriously, is that's your health and your safety and your body on the line. Take that seriously. Any matter of physical culture, take it seriously. If you went to the gym to lift weights, let's say you're doing bench press, and you're lifting close to your max, and you don't have a spotter, and for some reason you were dumb enough to put the clips on the end so you can't bail on the bar and just dump the plates, and then you start crushing your neck because you can't lift the bar and nobody's there to help you and save your life, and you're like, well, it's okay because I'm not a professional. So it's all right that I put myself in this compromising position that a professional wouldn't have put themselves in. It's okay, I'm not a professional. No. None of us would think that's acceptable. We wouldn't willingly put ourselves in that position in a weights and treadmills gym. And if you do, change that quick, you'll get hurt or killed. So why would we do that with martial arts? Protect yourself at all times. Take it seriously. Johnny Quid says, people always make fun of me for taking hobby-level martial arts too seriously. It's a silly thing. Think about people who train with firearms as a hobby. It's a fairly popular hobby in the United States and some other countries to train with firearms, to go to a firearm range, etc. Imagine for a minute that you're a firearm hobbyist, but you don't take it seriously, and you have no trigger discipline, and you have your finger on the trigger, and you start pointing it at people. It's okay, I'm not a professional. I don't have to take it seriously. That will not go over well. That will not go over well. Look, take everything seriously. Doesn't mean that you have to be a stick in the mud and have a stick up your butt and be a jerk to people. It means take life seriously, especially when matters of safety are involved. Valley Gomu says, the first rule of gun safety is to have fun. Ian Mabry, I don't know who that is, but I'm laughing because that's, in case anybody's wondering, no, that is not the first rule of gun safety. Don't put your finger on the trigger unless you plan to fire it. Don't point it at anything you do not wish to destroy. If you follow those two simple principles, you're going to be a lot better off than otherwise. And always treat the weapon as if it is loaded and dangerous, even if it's a prop. And always treat these guns as if they're loaded, because they're definitely not props. Coach has jokes today. All right, any other questions? I think I'm going to call this one a day. We've had fun. Hopefully, at least I have. Maybe you guys are just rolling your eyes like, I am here because I enjoy the suffering, but it has not been fun. Videos for stuff probably mostly unlisted. Bruce Lee versus Andre the Giant. Who do you see winning? I'm laughing at that because I made a video debunking this myth that Bruce Lee could sidekick Andre the Giant vertically into the air over the Eiffel Tower. And even though that sounds like obviously that is something that isn't true, that is clearly in the realm of fiction, people still tried to argue with me. They still said, no, Ramsey, you don't understand Bruce Lee. Obviously, if you just read the historical documents about Bruce Lee and talked to the people who trained with him, if you asked Jim Kelly, he would totally sign off on the idea that Bruce Lee could vertically sidekick a man over the moon. Mirsen Kerr says, any advice on getting back into training after you've been sick and haven't trained in a month? I had that experience. I had that experience recently. As soon as I got back from Thailand, I got really sick and couldn't get out there and train. And the answer is you get out there and train as soon as you can and do what you can. And as soon as I hang it up here, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out there and train. Now, I've been sick. I don't have the strength that I had pre-sickness. We'll build it back up again. I don't have the endurance I had pre-sickness. We'll build it back up again. It's a gradual process. Just be patient. This is what trips people up, is that they expect to be at that same level, like a video game character, like a role-playing game, video game character. I have reached level 30, and so in every fight, I will always perform like a level 30 fighter until I achieve level 31 and get 2 more strength points or whatever the level up involves. Real life isn't like that. You're in a constant state of flux. You're not a level 30 fighter who get sick, and then you're still at level 30. You're in a constant state of flux, man. And you have to be patient with the fact that you are a mortal human being in that constant state of flux, and you have to respect that constant state of change. So the answer to your question is get out there and train. Mr. No Name 145 says, what first aid thing would you recommend carry in your gym bag for others or yourself? Number one, sports tape. Keep at least a roll of sports tape in your gym bag. That is going to be super, super useful, not just for first aid, but for all kinds of things. For taping up your hands, for covering up cuts, for taping up your fingers so you don't get them hurt so badly while grappling. It's multi-use. If somebody has a 30,000-ton heavy bag, what kind of advantages would there be to hitting it? Go out there and punch the side of a granite mountain. There is your 30,000-ton heavy bag right there. And tell me, what advantage is there to punching a solid slab of granite? None. 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 There's a reason heavy bags are generally more human-sized and human-weighted, because we're training to fight humans, not mountains. All right, guys, I'm going to hang it up. Thanks for joining me. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.